You are about to take part in a time-traveling road trip through pop culture. A road trip with a clear destination and many stops along the way. This is but one act of one chapter of the serialized journey.
So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
When we last left off, we wrapped up our recap of MST3K's shortest season with Enzo Castellari's endless warnings to leave the Bronx, ray gun-toting lizard people, Stanley Kubrick's super slow cosmic poetry, and an open-ended series finale. This week, we're moving to a new channel and changing up the traditional format a bit by not covering the experiments of Season 8, but rather the connective tissue, courtesy of a network-mandated story arc. As always, I am Ryan Rodriguez, and you are stuck with the Coolness Chronicles Season 1, The History and Legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Chapter 11, Sci-Fi Odyssey, Act 1, A Sincere Apology to Bill Corbett. The begrudging goodwill between Best Brains and Comedy Central had run out well before the end of MST3K's 7th season back in May of 1996, but luckily negotiations had been ongoing to continue the series' run on another network, dating as far back as the production of the Mystery Science Theater movie. In February 1997, the show would debut on its new home of the Sci-Fi channel, now known as Sci-Fi. Sci-Fi was, at the time, only 5 years old and not too dissimilar from the original incarnation of Comedy Central. Both were struggling to cement an identity, both were originally established as a joint venture with Viacom, and both were best known for focusing on the collective libraries of their corporate masters rather than original programming. These days, Sci-Fi is mainly recognized for being the network that used to have Battlestar Galactica and Sharknado movies. Sci-Fi was also the sister station of the USA Network. USA's president of programming, Rod Perth, was a fan of MST3K and felt that the irreverent nature of the show could be a much-needed counterbalance to the network's traditional self-serious library. Unfortunately, while Perth clearly respected the show, the same probably couldn't be said for the people actually in charge of shepherding it into a new era. With a new network came new expectations on behalf of the executive regime. First, the film selection had to be altered. While monster movies and pictures with a sci-fi bent made up the majority of the experiments riffed in the first 7 seasons, I would argue, and have quite strenuously, that the best episodes strayed completely from any expected formula. But this new network was strict with format, and experiments had to be specific to the sci-fi or horror genres, as the executives were concerned that anything off-genre would be confusing to casual viewers who expected a certain kind of content from the network. This was naturally limiting and necessitated the rejection of movies that would be perfect riffing material almost sight unseen, not to mention settling for movies that fit the formula but weren't exactly exciting to tackle. As the run extended into further seasons, more wiggle room and negotiation was allowed, although the writers repeatedly had to make the argument that certain movies nebulously fit the requirements. By season 10, the last for the network, they were able to license movies that had no ties to the genre whatsoever, like Girl in Gold Boots and Final Justice, that, to me at least, feel closer to the original Comedy Central aesthetic. Secondly, the standalone nature of the show had to give way to a serialized story arc running through the entire season. Though this too was loosened in subsequent seasons, further aided by settling on an established set and relying more on theme than continuity, the mandate in Season 8 was incredibly strict and frustrating. Serialization, especially in 1997, relied on the lack of downtime between episodes, but Sci-Fi's schedule for the season saw the first 7 episodes air uninterrupted, followed by 2 weeks of repeats, another new episode followed immediately by a repeat, one more new episode followed by a month and a half of repeats, and then a more consistent, but not reliably so, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off schedule. For an example of how this worked counterintuitively, Experiment 816 ends with a cliffhanger and a new change of scenery. When the show returned 3 weeks later, they literally had to play the cliffhanger again for the benefit of viewers who may have lost track of the plot, only then to go on hiatus for an entire month directly afterwards. Not to mention the fact that the vast majority of the people who tune into the show regularly do so for the riffs, not for the sketches. A big addition to this already daunting obstacle was the nature of doing stories in any capacity. Some earlier episodes, primarily in the 6th season, told stories over the course of entire episodes, but once the credits rolled, everything would reset. Arcs require forward momentum, which means changes in scenery and episode construction. Instead of being a reliable 2-set production, Season 8 changed environments every 3 or 4 episodes, which meant more time needed to be applied to the mechanics of retrofitting the studio regularly. This presented both necessary challenges and difficult burdens for the crew. Thankfully, production designer Patrick Brantzig, prop diva Bees McKeever, and regular directors Kevin Murphy, Jim Mallon, and eventually Michael J. Nelson were more than up to the task. We previously addressed the changing look of the show in our last chapter, with Jeff Stonehouse joining the crew as director of photography for Season 6, and the advancements he brought with him are a key component of the series going forward. The host segments draped in shadow and deep blue light, the camera work offbeat and fluid, attributable to the introduction of a jib crane, which allowed for greater depth of focus and smooth gliding pans, and it all adds an extra dimension to an already new approach to the show's visual identity. It's a natural evolution, 2 seasons in a movie in the making. The third and final major difference was not brought on by the network, but instead shakeups at Best Brains. Trace Beaulieu, who played Crow for 8 years, counting the KTMA days, and worked as a designer, writer, and director throughout his long tenure, was no longer with the show. This meant the cast and crew had to make a big decision. What was to be done with everyone's favorite golden automaton? Unlike the situation that presented itself when Josh Weinstein left the role of Tom Servo after 2 years, when Trace left Crow, he was far past the embryonic stage. He was a large part of the core ensemble, and any changes made, like selecting a new performer, would have serious ramifications on how the show would grow throughout this period. Various ideas were tossed around, including replacing Crow with an entirely new character, but eventually it was decided that Bill Corbett, who had written for the series during Frank Conniff's final episodes at the end of Season 6, would take on Crow's puppeteering duties despite having no prior experience in that department. He would also come aboard as a full-time staff writer, joining the previous returning writers from the Comedy Central era, Mike Nelson, Kevin Murphy, Mary Jo Pehl, Bridget Jones, and Paul Chaplin. Bill's Crow was very different from Trace's interpretation, which was wise. Otherwise, he would have to do an impression of another performer for 3 years, which sounds monotonous and limiting. But it's also the reason why I never watched the series during this era, and here's where the title of this episode comes into focus. I flat out rejected the idea that anyone other than Trace could be Crow, and refused to watch a single episode without him in it. I harbored a grudge that was completely childish and undoubtedly unfair. Granted, I was a child at the time. When Rhino Home Video began releasing the Sci-Fi episodes on DVD, I avoided them like the plague and eventually relented after years of stubbornness. But even then, I skipped the host segments. I felt righteous in my indignation. It wasn't until RiffTrax was moving at a decent clip that I revisited the Sci-Fi episodes in their entirety and slowly began to appreciate what Bill brought to the character. So I just want to say, on the record, I'm sorry, Bill. I know my expectations for the puppet that you operated for 3 years were not a concern, but at the same time, I treated you like a mean stepdad when in actuality you did justice to one of the greatest characters in television history. Now that my sad mea culpa is out of the way, let's get to the meat of this particular hour of the podcast, the storylines of Season 8. We begin with a brand new theme song, which I enjoy greatly, but have an issue with of no importance whatsoever.
In the not too distant future, somewhere in time and space.
This is the standard grammatical issue that I have with Paul McCartney's Live and Let Die. You cannot be in the not too distant future and be somewhere in time and space. The future denotes a particular time, but somewhere in time suggests fluidity. Okay, let's keep going.
Mike Nelson and his robot pals are caught in an endless chase, pursued by a woman whose name is Pearl, an evil gal who wants to rule the world. She threw a few things in her purse, and in her rocket ship she hunts him all across the universe.
I'll send him cheesy movies, the worst I can find. He'll have to sit and watch them all, and I'll monitor his mind.
Now keep in mind, Mike can't control where the movies begin or end. He'll try to keep his sanity with the help of his robot friends.
There are numerous details of interest here. First is that Mary Jo's Pearl Forrester actually gets to sing the middle portion of the tune, which had previously only been sung by that era's host, originally Joel Hodgson and ultimately Mike Nelson. Second is that the premise established by the theme doesn't actually come to fruition until the end of the 4th episode of the season, so for 4 weeks of airtime, the opening credits were technically spoilers, which is endlessly delightful. The first experiment of the new season, Revenge of the Creature, continues the open-ended conclusion of the previous series finale, Laser Blast. The Satellite of Love's connection to Deep 13 via umbilicus was severed, Dr. Clayton Forrester transformed into a star baby and was taken under the wing of a suspiciously maternal Pearl, and Crow, Servo, Gypsy, Mike, and Cambot transcended their corporeal bodies at the very edge of space in order to drift across the cosmos as beings of pure energy. When the new opening credits conclude, the doorway sequence that usually marks the transition between theme song and episode is bypassed. Instead, we fade to an exterior of the SOL as our heroes make their way back to the redesigned bridge and back into their bodies. But not all of our heroes. It seems Crow gave up on his space adventure after a few years and has been on the satellite in his natural form for quite some time.
Oh, that Warren Christopher, he's a hoot. Funny, funny man. Crow! I'll be with you in a moment. Oh, guy kills me. Have you been helped?
Oh, it's me, Tom. Tom Servo!
Tom Servo? Oh, gosh, it's great to see you. And Gypsy! Oh, Gypsy, I missed you.
Hey, Crow.
And you are...
Crow, it's me, Mike.
Oh, mine's Crow. I don't believe we've met.
Of course we have. We spent years together watching bad movies.
Uh-huh. Does your little friend need to lie down?
I don't think he needs...
Crow, someone or something pulled us back here. We need to find out who or why.
Well, anything I can do to help, Gary.
It's Mike.
Even casual viewers may notice that something seems a bit off about Crow. He's more than a little stiff, something that Bill addressed thusly, quote, "Honored and thrilled as I was to be the Gold One's new alter ego, I was given this job on the show on the Friday before the Monday we started production on 8/01. And I think maybe, just maybe, it showed in the puppeteering for the first few episodes, especially this one, where Crow seemed to have suffered a stroke during the 500 years he hung out on the satellite." End quote. The voice is nasal and his personality a little unrefined, but there's something there. Bill would eventually get the hang of the gig by the 5th episode of the season. Anyway, Mike and the other bots had been in space for over 500 years, which would present some new avenues for potential stories in the future, and they've returned to discover that they are not only orbiting Earth, but it's an Earth that strongly resembles the dystopian society of the beloved classic Planet of the Apes. They make contact with the head ape, Professor Bobo, played by Kevin Murphy.
Bright eyes, hello. According to your calendar, this is the year 2525.
2525? Is man still alive?
Did woman survive?
Can you pick your son, pick your daughter, too, from the bottom of a long glass tube?
Sadly, no, this has not come to pass. And yet, apes have progressed far. Why, who can say what wonders... in the year 20... Doctor!
Within the span of a few episodes, this version of Bobo would be no more. In fact, he gets so stupid in the most delightful way possible, it's almost hard to imagine that at one point he was an articulate, intelligent bureaucrat. He operates out of a set that was internally referred to as Deep Ape, but never referred to as such on screen. Designed as a mashup of various elements from the Planet of the Apes series, like tan-colored stone huts, cages, and a miniature destroyed Statue of Liberty, mixed with details from modern-day monkey houses like a tire swing. But don't bother bringing up that particular film in Bobo's presence. He's already heard it before.
A planet where apes evolved from men?
Well, it's maybe a little more complicated than that, but that is the broad outline, yes.
You did it. You finally did it.
Damn us all to hell, yes, yes.
It's a madhouse. A
Madhouse, I know. Well then, are we all set? All on the same page? Good. Human civilization is dead and apes rule the world. Everything you ever knew or loved is no more.
Bobo also gives the SOL gang their first experiment in 500 plus years, which leads me to my nagging criticism of the entire season. Permit me to get nitpicky for just a minute. The first 7 seasons both implicitly and explicitly depict Cambot as the means of communication between Deep 13 and the satellite. But when you're talking to people on various planets, some of whom are not connected, nor have any prior experience with the concept of deep herding, how did the denizens of Deep Ape send signals to the SOL? How do aliens on other planets know how or why to send movies? It's a question that lingers throughout the initial episodes and only gets more confusing and arbitrary as the season continues. There. I've said my piece. I shan't bring it up again. After the first theater segment, Mike and the bots are performing routine maintenance on the bridge when Crow and Servo introduce Mike to the newest inhabitants of the satellite, little adorable microscopic buggers that look like glow-in-the-dark anthropomorphized mother boxes with legs, the nanites.
Where did you get a magnetic resonance scanning and tunneling microscope?
Fella named Helmet lived here about 20 years. I remember him quite fondly, in fact.
Hello, anybody in there? My name's Mike. Does that matter?
Yes, and hello, Mike. Connecting. I am nanite engineer device or net. Please tell me the nature of the problematic substrate or aversive condition which you would like corrected or anything. Mike, hold on. Here comes Wade. Hello, Wade.
Yes, hello, Ned. Hello, Mike. As Ned was saying, beyond our copious and continual self-replication, resident order is our task in the precise correction of aversive conditions and the implementation of appropriate technology relevant to that condition.
Skipping forward to the end of the episode, we'll cover the other host segments next week. Crow does a little genealogy research on the internet to try and figure out how the planet could be overrun by evolved hyper-intelligent apes. It turns out that the Nelson family is largely to blame.
Virtually every single one of Mike's descendants married apes.
Come on, all my grandkids?
Yep.
What about great-grandchildren?
Checking, yes. Francis Nelson married a macaque. Otherwise, they all married great apes.
You can see why he's kind of upset, folks.
Thomas Ryan Nelson married a slow loris. We have an R.W. Nelson, probably great-great-grandchild, who married a ruffed lemur. Yep, your family liked its monkeys, Mike.
Still, I imagine by then, though, it wasn't that unusual.
Oh, it was quite unusual.
Shortly thereafter, we get the surprise that the entire episode has been building to. The lawgiver that rules over Deep Ape is none other than a recently unfrozen Pearl Forrester, which is really shocking if you haven't seen the opening credits.
You see, after my beloved Clayton turned into a star baby, I vowed, get off! I vowed to do it differently. I vowed to raise him to be as fine a young man as you could ever hope to see. But I got busy and I never got around to it, so I got another hopeless idiot who started off on his mad experiment. And then it happened. My beloved Clayton passed away. When I was done smothering him, I vowed to avenge his death. He asked me on his deathbed to keep the experiment going no matter what the cost.
This is the short story, right?
So when I died, I asked someone to freeze my body, which they did, and it was really quite reasonable. 500 years later, the apes thawed me out, cured my freezer burn, and that's why I'm the lawgiver.
This version of Pearl is completely different from the two previous incarnations, and she is the only one of the eventual 3 lead mads in the Sci-Fi era to remain in the same mold until the series finale. And there's something that needs to be said about Pearl. Mary Jo Pehl is not Trace's replacement. If there had to be a new enemy and Forrester and Frank were not in the picture, Pearl is the perfect logical next choice to take charge, and Mary Jo absolutely stepped up to the plate. Some of my favorite line deliveries and little moments of these 3 seasons belong to her, and I cannot wait to revisit them as we go forward. Before we move to the next episode, let's take a few moments to discuss the film series that we've alluded to several times already, starting with 1968's landmark sci-fi adventure, Planet of the Apes. In 1963, French author Pierre Boulle released the original novel Planet of the Apes, about human explorers who travel through space and visit a distant planet where talking, technologically advanced apes are dominant and humans are mute scavengers hunted by their superiors. The ape societal structure is determined by species, with politician orangutans, militarized gorillas, and chimpanzee scientists. The film rights were purchased by American producer Arthur P. Jacobs, who hired visionary science fiction writer Rod Serling to adapt the screenplay. Serling reliably provided his trademark veiled political commentary through a twist ending that revealed man's dabbling in nuclear warfare led to an irradiated Earth, paving the way for apes to evolve and inherit the planet. Serling's script also included the technologically advanced society from the novel, with apes functioning in modern cities, flying helicopters, and operating complex machinery. It took Jacobs more than 3 years to convince his studio to finance the film, eventually setting up shop at 20th Century Fox, which stipulated that the $10 million budget be cut almost in half, and even then expressed hesitancy at greenlighting the project until legendary prosthetic artist John Chambers, who eventually won an honorary Oscar for his efforts, fabricated ape makeup for various screen tests. In order to accommodate the lower budget, formerly blacklisted screenwriter Michael Wilson, who previously adapted an earlier Boole novel, Bridge on the River Kwai, for David Lean, was brought onto the film to strip most of the technology and rein in the scope, but also drastically alter the majority of the plot. Charlton Heston was cast as American astronaut Taylor, the human male lead, and Heston in turn recommended Franklin J. Schaffner to direct, having just worked with him on 1965's The Warlord.
Can't help thinking that somewhere in the universe there has to be something better than man. Has to be.
The words are Charlton Heston's. Get out a last signal to Earth that we've landed! The world he finds out in the galaxy will challenge every idea you've ever had of civilization. A planet where man is the lowest order of living things, and the superior beings are apes. They build the cities, make the laws, the gods, and control the guns that hunt a race of lowly, terrified humans who run wild in the jungles, are caged in the prisons, and stuffed in the museums. 20th Century Fox transforms the motion picture screen into Planet of the Apes. It's a madhouse! It's a
But it did not end here. It ended in an episode so unpredictable, so shocking, it made the horror which preceded it seem calm and gentle as a summer's night.
I think I can skip over the general story of Planet of the Apes, as it's so ingrained in popular culture that people who have never even bothered to actually watch the film know key dialogue and the twist ending by heart. Needless to say, it was a massive success financially and critically, and remains possibly the most influential science fiction film in recent memory. If you're thinking that I glossed over Star Wars, you are mistaken. That is space opera. Its success came at a very important time for Fox, which along with every major studio at the time was undergoing a period of costly flops and impending bankruptcy. A sequel was immediately greenlit, and Jacobs attempted to get Heston and Schaffner to return. Schaffner declined as he was in production on another massive hit for Fox, 1970's Patton, and Heston only agreed to appear on the condition that his character be killed off and his salary go to the charity of his choice. Television director Ted Post was hired to replace Schaffner. Rod Serling wrote a treatment that was ultimately discarded, so the studio turned to screenwriter Paul Dean to write Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Dean doubled down on the nuclear paranoia that infused the infamous ending of the original, crafting a story that involved an underground society of telepathic mutants who worshipped a doomsday bomb, the Alpha and Omega. Not to be outdone in terms of shock value, the film ended with the murder of Heston's character, who subsequently uses his final moments to set off the obliteration of the entire planet. Art really does imitate life. Despite being produced on a lower budget than the original, Beneath was another runaway success for Fox, and the studio was determined to keep the money train going despite not having a titular planet anymore. The solution? Shortly before the destruction of their planet, lead chimpanzees Cornelius and Zira, played by Roddy McDowall and Kim Hunter, used Taylor's space shuttle to travel through time, landing on present-day Earth for a mostly lighthearted melodrama with political undertones called Escape from the Planet of the Apes. Although its legacy is rather mixed, comedian Dana Gould once perfectly described it as love American style with apes, it's certainly one of my personal guilty pleasures and the most tonally unique installment of the Apes pentology. And even though it didn't set the world on fire, there was a substantial profit to be had and it led to another completely different sequel, 1972's Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Building on Escape's cliffhanger of Cornelius and Zira's child Caesar, Roddy McDowall's second role in the franchise, being left in the past after the death of his parents and raised by their ally, a former circus owner played by Ricardo Montalban, we flash forward nearly 20 years to a dystopian society eerily similar to that of the 1968 original, but inverted. Advanced apes are now slave labor for humans until a traumatized Caesar leads a violent rebellion against the status quo. Steeped in the fear and pain of the civil rights movement, Conquest might be the most relentlessly grim and prescient entry in the original series. And while the production quality may be lacking compared to earlier installments, there's a stark urgency to the proceedings, and it may be the most consistent sequel. The saga came to a definitive end less than a year later with Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which cut the budget yet again and eschewed much of writer Paul Dean's prior pessimistic view of coexistence in favor of a more optimistic depiction of the final climactic battle between ape and man, as told by John Huston's Lawgiver from 700 years in the future. Battle concluded the saga that began a mere 5 years previous and spanned centuries, not with a bang, but with a very cheap-looking whimper. Of all the shoutouts given to the Apes films throughout this particular season of MST3K, I am not surprised that this is the movie least referenced, if it bore mentioning at all. But just because the films left theaters after this fourth sequel, that didn't necessarily mean that Fox was done with the idea. There was still another medium to conquer: television. But if you want to hear more about the next era of Apes, from CBS to animation to remakes and reimaginings, in addition to other Fox Sci-Fi franchises, all will be divulged in one of this month's bonus episodes at patreon.com/coolnesschronicles. The next episode, The Leech Woman, begins with the albatross that would hang over a majority of the season, something that probably annoyed the writers just as much as the justifiably abandoned letter segment, the recap of the previous episode.
Hi everyone, Mike Nelson here. Just want to make sure we're all caught up. See, we've become unstuck in time, and currently we're shipwrecked over Earth's orbit in the year 2525, a time where apes rule the world and man has been... Hey, Crow, I'm doing a thing here, huh?
Meanwhile, Pearl's presence in Deep Ape is causing nothing but anguish for Bobo, who already has to put up with his overly optimistic colleague, Dr. Peanut. Later in the episode, Bobo pressures her to interrupt her lounging and cucumber facial to actually live up to her name and give the community some laws, which she does half-heartedly.
It seems that some of the apes have been saying, well, you haven't actually made any law per se, and, well, some of them are contending that perhaps you aren't really the lawgiver.
What? Who?
Well, I'm not going to name it. Well, Cheetah and Coco and that proboscis monkey. Do you like him? I think he's just...
Oh, okay. Take this down, Bobo. Laws. Okay, the great and mighty and foxy lawgiver does decree that there is to be no parking on Sundays.
Yes, you are very wise, lawgiver.
And no soup with buffet.
Ah, yes, it is ape law.
Now, none of this is set in stone. I'm kidding, of course.
Like seeing Bobo in his element in the premiere, this scene is basically a time capsule. He and Pearl would not have the same dynamic much longer, and understandably so. Speaking of Mary Jo, she has my favorite moment in the entire episode as the voice of a rural nanite in the midst of a brutal union dispute.
It were during the Union summer the prairie fire started. Some said they caved that mine in on purpose, but I couldn't hardly believe it. Ma told me just to mind myself.
Next up, Experiment 803, The Mole People. Bobo is fed up with all the new policies implemented by the lawgiver.
Oh, hi. I'm in a crappy mood today. You want to know why I'm in a crappy mood? Because it's Lawgiver Days! Hooray! Lawgiver Days! Yes, human, in accordance with the Lawgiver, this time of year shall now be known as Lawgiver Days in order to honor... Well, I think it's pretty apparent, don't you? And for some reason, this is the 32nd annual Lawgiver Days. I don't know. All are ordered now by the lawgiver to make merry and be light of heart under pain of horrible lingering death. It's Lawgiver Days. Lift up your hearts and be glad, friends. Oh, God.
It's one of the best performances Kevin has delivered for the series, and that's saying a lot. 2 segments later, Crow has taken on the guise of an archaeologist, and whilst digging through the layers of the bridge in search of evidence of his own previous lives, he's finally come to terms with the fact that he spent 500 years in isolation and eventually realizes that he does remember Mike after all.
But you know what that would mean? I lived here by myself for 500 years. Mike, it's you!
Yeah.
And Servo! Yeah. Oh, how are you guys?
Good, pretty good.
Movies, I remember now. So what in the name of heaven was I doing with myself? Did I do anything but eat nut goodies for 500 years?
Well, you did make this nice fertility symbol.
What'd you need that for?
I don't know. Apparently I couldn't conceive at some point.
The end of the episode features one of the few celebrity cameos of the series, Minnesota Vikings running back and all-around stud Robert Smith, not to be confused with the lead singer of The Cure. Smith is presented as a mute, Nova-like prize for Pearl, who at first seems confused by what she's supposed to do with a sculpture of a man until it dawns on her. Sex, sex, and more sex. Experiment 804, The Deadly Mantis, is more steeped in Planet of the Apes than any other episode aside from the premiere. It begins with the reveal of a holy atomic bomb that is worshipped by a bunch of mutant zealots. Sound familiar?
How do you do, Bryce? I'll be with you in a second. Well, some neighbors dropped by and they brought their, what do you call this thing again?
The holy and everlasting bomb.
Right, and we're helping them fix their detonator, Watamahuchi, so that they can, how did you put that again?
Reveal our true selves unto the bomb.
That's it, yeah.
Well, all right. Let's give that a try.
Mike gives Bobo and Dr. Peanut some casual advice on how to properly maintain their doomsday weapon, which sets off a detonation sequence. The nanites help repair the ship so Mike can fly it away from what's soon to be an irradiated Earth, and the satellite takes off for parts unknown, but not before a ghastly disaster.
I feel a disturbance, as though a million monkeys cried out at once, and then were silenced.
Yes. It's unimaginably horrible.
Yes, the Earth is destroyed.
No. Worse, we got movies!
For those counting at home, that's one planet that Mike has destroyed. Keep an eye on that number. But you can't get rid of a good lawgiver that easily. Pearl escaped before the complete destruction of the Earth in her souped-up Volkswagen bus, the Widowmaker, with Bobo in tow, and she makes her presence known by firing a six-shooter at the fleeing SOL.
Your reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, you crapheads. I escaped with minor damage to the dew. Now, eat lead.
Oh, she's got that spaceman souped up to heck and back. She's outmaneuvering me at every turn.
All right, baby, out!
The bots take turns steering the ship throughout the episode during a series of sketches that involve the ups and downs of deep space travel, like radio stations that only play country music and alien roadkill, including a moment where everyone falls asleep at the wheel and we see a snoozing crow whose eyes have been modified to appear closed with little slits where his pupils usually rest, and Gypsy's headlight flutters as she drifts in and out of slumber. It's all so damn cute. At the end of the episode, there's a surprise letter segment, but with a twist. It turns out that the message received by the satellite crew is from Dr. Peanut, who was thrown back in time 400 years, not unlike the plot to Escape from the Planet of the Apes, and shacked up with one of Mike's relatives.
Oh, look at this, Peanut. He says, "Dear Mike and all, blast from end of world hurled me back in time to the year 2112. Weather's been great. Live in Wisconsin, met a nice girl." And he sent a picture. He says her name is Ludmilla Nelson.
Relative of yours, Mike?
Oh, come on. I mean, what are the odds of that?
Why don't you put that on Still Store there, Cambot?
Yeah, put that up there.
I see a resemblance, Mike.
Congratulations, Mike.
Pearl announces her intention to pursue the inhabitants of the satellite to the ends of the universe, completing a story cycle that was, again, spoiled in the opening credits for the past 4 episodes. The next experiment, 805, The Thing That Couldn't Die, continues the cosmic road trip to more previously unseen planets, but not before Servo holds an anti-Crow art show that was entirely paid for by Crow himself, who is quite the benevolent grant provider. It's a segment that shows how far Bill has come in a short amount of time as both a puppeteer and a confident performer.
Hey, hi, Mike. Servo, I just paid the caterer. It's kind of pricey, but hey, that's the art world, huh? So, let's take a look at my portraits.
Huh?
Ah. Yeah. Wow. Oh, my. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crow is, Ha!
Yeah.
Well, you know, Servo, these all...
Paint a stark portrait of a cruel despot?
No, I was actually going to say they're all kind of negative.
The satellite's voyage through deep space is interrupted when an unknown planet transports Mike and the bots, as well as the Widowmaker, into its orbit. It's a planet of pale-skinned, pompous, hooded, omnipotent beings known as observers, who carry their brains in pans.
Please, do not be afraid.
Welcome, and try to comprehend us.
Okay.
What's to comprehend?
Oh, you are to us as an amoeba is to you, for we are the observers.
And we have evolved beyond language. We are gratified that you understand our words, for we communicate only with our minds.
Wow. Except you're talking now.
Yeah.
No. Do you see how your comprehension fails you? For we communicate only with our minds.
You see, we have evolved beyond the need for bodies, and now we are simply brains.
You are as amoebas, but do not be afraid.
The observers are played by Paul Chaplin, Mike, and Bill, and they feel like the MST3K equivalent of Uatu the Watcher from the Marvel Universe, a moon dweller whose sole occupation is to monitor the activity of sentient beings and never interfere with human history, which he invariably does almost every time he appears in a comic. The main difference? Uatu's brain still resides in his oversized noggin. This particular detail may be an homage to the alien race, the Providers, from the original Star Trek episode Gamesters of Triskelion. The Observer planet is much more sparse than Deep Ape, and is presented as a large white expanse littered with modestly sized gray monoliths. Since they've evolved far beyond the need for bodies, despite having them, they have clearly also moved past decoration, which I admire. It's very Swedish. In the next episode, 806, The Undead, the observers send intelligence tests to the Satellite of Love to determine who will be spared and who will be dissected and placed on display, and Servo passes his exam with flying colors, so they invite him to become one with their tribe.
Hi, guys! Turns out I did so darn well on that test, they've invited me to join their little club down here. Anyway, I'm no longer Servo, I'm now simply Observer. But you can call me Servo!
Hey, is this permanent?
Mike, no offense, but that's exactly the kind of question I'd expect from a limited brain guy like yourself. Anyway, I'll just play it by ear. It's a pretty soft gig. Stand around, observe, eat, but the brainy guys got their heads up their behinds a little bit, if you know what I'm saying. Hi, how you doing, guys?
Because he's a robot and has no brain to carry in a dish, Servo uses an olive for decoration. It's adorable. But his tenure as an observer is short-lived. As it turns out, Servo is bad at paperwork, mind reading, and in addition, is kind of a kleptomaniac who habitually steals spoons. Lots of spoons. He's chased around the planet by furious observers before getting kicked out.
Leave me alone, you big dumb alien! Get here!
Because Servo scored higher on his test than one of the observer's own, that particular observer, who is referred to as Brain Guy by Pearl, is punished by having his brain placed in an enrichment chamber. At the end of the episode, we learn that said enrichment chamber is in the planet's kitchen for some reason, so Bobo ends up unwittingly using it as an ingredient in a sandwich that he prepares for what feels like 25 minutes.
Oh, something.
Yes. Oh, nice. Very nice. Oh, fresh. Like it's nice and fresh. When the swallows come back, the tapestry I know. That's when I'll come back to you.
Believe it or not, this is actually a classic example of an old storytelling device called Chekhov's brain. If a brain is established as being in a room in the first act, that brain must be eaten in a sandwich in the third act. Formula. It works. We're going to skip Experiment 807, Terror from the Year 5000, because the majority of the host segments in it relate directly to the feature presentation. We move to the next experiment, 808, The She-Creature. It seems our sojourn on Observer World has come to a close as Bobo is about to be dissected.
Bobo's very stupid. Anyway, I'm locked in some kind of force field. So here's the deal. I know you guys despise me, even loathe me, so could you help me out?
Careful.
I need a distraction of some kind. If you can think of something, I promise to never show you another bad movie again. Really.
Mike asks the nanites to take care of the situation, and because he doesn't pay that much attention to the context of his request, they take care of it with extreme prejudice.
Well, maybe the nanites can take care of that little problem, huh?
Yeah, we'll fix your little problem for you.
Uh-huh. Hey, Steve, Mr. Nelson wants a number 7.
Pronto!
Well, there you go. That took care... Hey, what's a number 7?
Mike,
You blew up another planet. What is your deal?
I just told them to take care of the little problem.
And they did! Here comes Mike, destroyer of worlds!
Oh, God of fire and vengeance. Stay away from me. You're the smart meat. Get away from me.
We got the movie sign.
Bill's observer, now without a homeworld, joins Bobo and Pearl and the Widowmaker, and our trio of mads that will remain the antagonists for the rest of the series are firmly in place. If Forster and Frank were evil Abbott and Costello, meet the evil Three Stooges.
My entire world is destroyed. Everything I knew and held dear is gone.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Mike Nelson destroyed my planet, too. Let me tell you.
Hey, hand me the Cheez-Its, will ya?
But the craft gets a flat tire because it's space, so it makes perfect sense, and when Bobo goes out to change it, he falls to an unknown planet below. Mike and the bots regain control of the satellite's flight capabilities and attempt to skip town, but not before invoking the catchphrase of a very litigious corporation.
Okay, well, here we go.
To infinity and...
Disney, lawsuit.
Some other places.
We get a tease of the fate of Bobo as well as the next destination of this spacefaring Odyssey in the MST3K equivalent of a post-credit scene, played instead of the traditional stinger.
Ow. My spine. Ow.
In the next experiment, 809, I Was a Teenage Werewolf, Pearl has retrieved Bobo and set up camp on the mysterious planet below.
Hey, Nelson Rockalooser, what it is, what it was, what it shall be. We found Nimrod here.
Howdy.
And since this planet is so nice, I thought I'd teach these tenderfoots how to camp. Maybe even do some hunting for grizzly bar, elk, or the three-horned rastodian of Thynos 4.
While there are strange doings afoot on the surface, this week's real adventure is set almost completely on the satellite, paying tribute to a different science fiction film franchise, Alien, including Bees McKeever's debut as the newest incarnation of Magic Voice.
Switching to auxiliary power, shields are non-functional.
Oh, super. Adrift in a strange quadrant with no shields. Creatures of any sort could just wander in here and snack in our torsos, bury us till we're tender and come back for more. Yikes. Well, your torso, Nelson. No creature'd want to eat us.
Quiet. What's that?
Sorry, little Charlie horse there. Sorry.
Servo decides to brave the dangers presented by pesky xenomorphs and see what all the fuss is, with disastrous results.
I gotta show you something, okay? And you see if you notice it. Well, just look at me as if I was normal, all right? I'll play if I can see it. Oh, thanks a lot. Makes me feel real good, like I'm not sensitive enough about it already.
Okay.
Sidebar. Facehugger is too cute a term for what the alien is actually doing to people's faces. Let's be honest when describing the creature in the future. It's a facefucker. Confront the horrors of space violation with correct terminology. End sidebar. Later, when trying to detect the presence of additional aliens on the ship, Crow obtains a proximity detector. Unfortunately, it has multiple settings.
Go. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. They're everywhere. They're under the floor.
No.
They're in the walls.
Oh, my God.
Jeez.
Oh, no.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, God. Okay, we gotta do something. Notify Gypsy to neutralize all functions unless absolutely
Absolutely necessary for human life support. I got it, Mike. I'll go.
Too late.
What?
Too late.
What do you mean it's too late?
Too late.
Oh, no.
10 yards.
Hold me.
5 yards. They're coming right at us, Mike. They're on top of it. Okay, please, it's crawling with me.
We gotta get to the southwest corner of the basement now. Let's move.
Alfred, would you look at this? I had it on the wrong setting. I was measuring the humidity.
When the crew returns from the theater, the ship is infested with alien eggs, and there's only one way to handle this dicey situation. Make xenomorph omelets. When this doesn't work and the queen alien is attacking the ship, Mike executes a last-ditch Hail Mary.
Hey, Mike, it's growing exponentially. He's doing it. Mike's become the most repulsive thing in the known universe.
Adam Duritz of County Crows!
Someone's getting close to understanding.
Oh, God, no, let the alien kill us instead!
Elvis, you're funky as you can be. Around here, everybody wants to understand Mr. Jones. It's working, Mike!
It's successful, but at what cost? Before we move on to the next experiment to check in on what's happening at Pearl's campsite below, let's briefly discuss the series that inspired this episode, starting with the Ridley Scott classic that started it all, 1979's Alien. Way back in either Chapter 1 or 2, I don't recall because my memory is faulty and also because I don't listen to these shows after I've recorded them, which may explain a lot, we touched upon the absurdist 1973 John Carpenter-Dan O'Bannon collaboration, Dark Star. O'Bannon, who also starred in Dark Star, always held reservations that the only scene in the film involving an alien depicted that creature as an overinflated beach ball that resembled a large tomato with feet. He would make sure that, if he returned to the subject, it would be a very different take, and tapped Swiss painter H.R. Giger to develop a more imposing creature, the psychosexual xenomorph, which Giger did in spades. With his co-writer Ron Shusett, O'Bannon set out to make essentially the horror movie inverse of Dark Star, a group of bickering space truckers trapped on a cavernous spaceship with a creature of unknown origin and murderous intentions. After a deal with Warriors director Walter Hill's production company, numerous rewrites, and some hesitancy from the studio to step into the science fiction genre before the surprise success of Star Wars, by 1978, the film was ready to shoot. British commercial director Ridley Scott, whose feature film The Duelists had grabbed the attention of the producers, was chosen to direct. It's easy to see why Ridley Scott keeps returning to the universe he helped build. As an efficient, compelling storyteller, Alien is unquestionably his finest hour. Like Star Wars, it's a B picture with A resources and A+ execution. The plot is deceptively simple. A cosmic freighter detects an unknown distress signal somewhere in the far reaches of space and, out of obligation, sends a response team to the pinged planet, where one of the crew, John Hurt, is attacked by a mysterious acidic-blooded life form that attaches itself to his face and puts him in a coma. When John Hurt's character awakens, the creature dies and detaches from him, only for its endgame to be revealed during a celebratory dinner. It wasn't just attached to him, it was laying embryos in his chest, leading to one of the most startling and brutal moments of body horror ever captured on film. A moment that I still get tense during, and I've seen it almost 30 times.
Baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Oh, baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
My mistake. That was from Spaceballs. But the real scene is remarkably close. This new chest-bursting organism flees to the darkened corners of the ship, grows to an intimidating size, and begins picking off crew members one by one until it's up to the genre's defining feminist hero, Ellen Ripley, played by the legendary Sigourney Weaver, to get rid of the double-mouthed bastard once and for all. Alien is a small-scaled interplanetary haunted house film, but infused with astonishing production design, haunting cinematography, and careful story construction. Unlike the sequels that would follow, the titular organism completely lives up to its name. It's alien in every way possible. Its origin, its biology, its functionality, it's all perfectly, frighteningly other. There's no point trying to reason with it. Any questions worth asking can wait until it's been jettisoned into the cold vacuum of space. On the other end of the spectrum, the film gave birth to the greatest fictional corporation of all time, Weyland-Yutani, the evil that we all work for despite our supposed principles. Though it took 7 years, Alien eventually gave unholy birth to a sequel, James Cameron's 1986 film Aliens, which also served as a primary inspiration for the MST3K episode that led us to this point. For more on where the franchise would go in the future, as recent as 2017, check out the aforementioned Patreon bonus episode. It's not just Planet of the Apes, it's also Aliens. The next experiment, 810, the Giant Spider Invasion, is an homage of a different kind, taking its cue from both the original 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Philip Kaufman's 1978 remake. Turns out that the planet Pearl and her two stooges have been camping out on is infested with mind-manipulating, human-replicating aliens in the form of pods, which Bobo identifies as zucchinis. Within a few minutes, they already have both Brain Guy and Pearl under their spell, ready to aid the aliens' conquering of the universe.
Well, isn't that pleasant and quality?
Yes, and thank you.
Yes, quality has been inserted into every sector of our day, and we wish to share it with you.
Please accept these lovely and decent throw pillows.
After the feature presentation begins, Mike, Servo, and Crow return to the bridge to Gypsy, who has fallen under the zucchini spell.
Oh, hey, Gyps, what happened to the zucchini throw pillow things that Mrs. Forrester sent us?
I put them in a safe place.
Okay, and where's that?
A place where you would meet a horrible demise before laying your polluting fingers upon them.
So you put them in Mike's laundry basket?
Good one. And now you should sleep. I have prepared warm milk to help you.
But I'm not tired.
The SOL gang, sans Gypsy, deduce that staying awake is the key to thwarting the zucchini hypnosis. Mike and Servo are able to utilize coffee to resist, but Crow takes more drastic measures.
Crow!
I'm fine. Mike, I French roast, Vivarin, diet pills, Mountain Dew, Jolt, Water Joe's, Surge, chocolate-covered espresso beans, M&M's, and I'm listening to Nietzsche Rap, and I'm fine, Mike, really, I'm fine.
It's all right, okay, just don't explode. I'm not checking
Roger.
on the planet here.
The only person who seems to be unfazed by the whole ordeal is Bobo, as his mind is so deficient that the pods cannot penetrate it. And Mike encourages him to stop Pearl and Brain Guy from loading the Widowmaker with pods in order to spread them across the universe. But any progress Bobo makes is short-lived, and his subterfuge is quickly squashed by a hypnotized Pearl, who promptly ties him up. In the next host segment, Servo is met on the bridge by his doppelganger, and Mike and Crow must decide which version is the real Tom. They ask questions that only the real Servo would know, but it turns out that those questions are so vague and easy to answer that the doppelganger gets more right answers than the real McCoy. It seems that Servo Prime is doomed until the questioning turns to Servo's underwear collection, first seen in the MST3K movie, which the doppelganger is unaware of. The imposter is scared off, Bobo destroys the mother zucchini, and the collective spell is broken.
Now, where's that mother pod? Oh, right. Oh, so secret.
Before we move on to the next chapter of the story, let's touch upon the cinematic legacy of body snatching, starting in 1956.
Will you tell these fools I'm not crazy? Make them listen to me before it's too late! Listen to me. Please listen. If you don't, if you won't, if you fail to understand, then the same incredible terror that's menacing me will strike at you!
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet, bringing a new dimension in terror to the giant super scope screen.
Whatever intelligence or instinct it is that can govern the forming of human flesh and blood out of thin air is fantastically powerful, beyond any comprehension.
A cursed, dreadful, malevolent thing was happening to those he loved.
Jack!
From city to city, an incredible hysterical panic spreads. As the unimaginable becomes real, the impossible becomes true.
Based on Jack Vinnie's 1955 novel The Body Snatchers, Don Siegel's 1956 film Invasion of the Body Snatchers involves small-town Northern Californian doctor Miles Bennell, played by genre luminary Kevin McCarthy, whose patients begin operating under the irrational delusion that their family members have been replaced with identical copies. But when Bennell's friend discovers human bodies with most of their features in his house, that supposed delusion no longer seems psychological. In Bennell's greenhouse, he discovers large bubbling pods in the process of replicating his doppelganger, and it becomes clear that something strange is afoot. But since this is a paranoid thriller, any and all authority figures are quick to dismiss every concern.
Stop trying to rationalize everything, will you? Let's face it, we have a mystery on our hands.
Sure you have, a real one. Whose body was it, and where is it now? A completely normal mystery. Whatever it is, it's well within the bounds of human experience, and I don't think you ought to make any more of it.
Look, I wouldn't. If I hadn't looked in Becky's cellar, how do you explain away the body I saw there?
I don't think you saw one there.
You don't think I saw one here either?
I know you did, because 3 others saw it too.
But I dreamed up the second one.
Doctors can have hallucinations too. The mind is a strange and wonderful thing. I'm not sure it'll ever be able to figure itself out. Everything else, maybe.
Dr. Bennell deduces that the pods clone host bodies while they sleep and then have their lives assumed. Within a matter of hours, everyone he knows and loves has been replaced by these so-called pod people and are loading trucks with pods to be dispersed across the state, then the country, and eventually the world. When confronted by 2 of these pod people, now wearing his former friends' faces, he is informed that it's all the grand plan of an extraterrestrial intelligence which sees itself as the savior of the universe.
They're taking you over, cell for cell, atom for atom. There's no pain. Suddenly, while you're asleep, they'll absorb your minds, your memories, and you're reborn into an untroubled world.
Where everyone's the same?
Exactly.
What a world.
As Dr. Bennell tries to flee the town and contact the outside world, the pod people outmaneuver him at every turn. Soon his girlfriend Becky falls asleep and is duplicated, and Bennell is left alone with his dread and defeat, screaming at passing motorists in the streets in a most memorable conclusion.
Can't you see? Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
But because the studio deemed this ending to be unsatisfactory and dire, director Don Siegel was forced to shoot alternate hopeful bookend sequences. One at the beginning that features Bennell ranting and raving about the ordeal he just survived before recounting the narrative in flashback, and one after the downer ending that features the doctors questioning Bennell, eventually believing his story, contacting the FBI, and barricading the city to prevent the further invasion of pods. The original Invasion of the Body Snatchers is arguably the brightest moment of the socially conscious 1950s sci-fi era. A clean, economical story that moves at a clip and gets more engrossing with every dramatic reveal. It's so rich in allegory and open to interpretation that people still to this day cannot agree whether it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of McCarthyism or a warning about the potential communist threat enveloping the nation or something else. Even Don Siegel insisted that while he intended the film to be thought-provoking and analytical, he did not possess a specific political bent, although he didn't discount the potential for such a message. His intent was to simply create an entertaining thriller. 22 years later, Philip Kaufman, who would go on to co-write Raiders of the Lost Ark and direct The Right Stuff, boarded a remake written by W.D. Richter, future director of Buckaroo Banzai, with the intent of making the film moodier, weirder, and more stylish, and rectifying the sin of the studio-mandated happy-ish ending. The setting was updated to present-day San Francisco, allowing Kaufman to ask the question, could a pod people invasion happen in a progressive enclave? The political satire is more overt, Leonard Nimoy running an Est-like self-help empire, for example, and the paranoia amplified to 11, frequently feeling like a cinematic panic attack. Original star Kevin McCarthy appears as the Running Man, intended to be both an homage to the 1956 version and a bit of connective tissue between the 2 films, as if he's been screaming about the invasion for 22 years.
Oh my God! Lock the door! Lock the door! They're coming! They're coming! Help! Help! They're coming! They're coming! Listen to me! Listen! Help me! You're next, please! Please! You're next! We're in danger! Please, listen to me! Something terrible! Please! You're next! Here they are! They're already here! Come! You're next! They're coming!
It's all fantastic and insanely creative, but as I mentioned earlier, the film was built around its ending. The whole narrative builds to the Bennell character, now played by Donald Sutherland, destroying a pod distribution plant, but ultimately acknowledging that despite his best efforts, eventually he will have to sleep, and the pod people will overcome their temporary setback and emerge victorious. After this huge set piece, we see Sutherland standing in front of City Hall with an emotionless face. He's approached by Victoria Cartwright's character, who is delighted to see him. But her delight is short-lived. As she gets closer to him, she realizes that he's not the man she once knew. He points an accusing finger at her and lets out a truly alien scream. Unlike the original, this invasion could not be quelled. Next stop, your town. It's a moment of palpable dread that devastates as much as it surprises, and elevates the most prescient science fiction film of the 50s into something more hopeless and sinister. Both versions are well worth your time, but there's no question which one has the better ending. Experiment 811, Parts the Clonus Horror, features inadvertent foreshadowing of future episodes when the camping Mads cross paths with some runaway space children. Buddy, played by Mike, Darlene, played by Bridget, and Scooter, played by Paul, and all three are standing on their knees, dwarf style. They're beings of both immense supernatural power and every annoying adolescent quirk, and Pearl is having none of it.
And we're lost and hungry.
And why? Because we ran away.
Oh, well, aren't you just the most delightful little...
It's funny. Oh, I know. You can be our new mommy.
Hold on. I ain't gonna be nobody's mommy.
Okay, you can be our new grandma.
Don't you ever say that again. Capiche? All right. Here's some clove gum and church key. Now scram.
How is this foreshadowing exactly? Well, the film being parodied, 1958's The Space Children, directed by Jack Arnold, would be riffed on the show during the next season. Although, to the best of my memory, which is admittedly faulty, they do not reference this episode in the theater. Unlike the titular kids in that movie, however, the whippersnappers in this episode can warp reality in the vein of Bill Mummy's character from It's a Good Life. Unlike the titular kids in that movie, however, the whippersnappers in this episode can warp reality in the vein of Bill Mummy's character from the It's a Good Life episode of The Twilight Zone. Anyway, Mike and the Bots realize that if they play ball with the space children, they could convince them not to send them that week's experiment, an opportunity that Mike finds a way to botch.
Mike, I suggest reverse psychology. Tell them, don't not send us a movie that doesn't exist.
How about guilt and shame? They worked on me.
No, Mike. Kids are fragile, but they need structure. Be firm but fair. Then offer them money.
Nah, just tell them we'll take away their pagers and their big pants and I don't know what else.
Oh, wait. I've got it. Okay. Hi, kids. You know, we've always been there for you, working so hard to provide for your future. So don't you dare send us a movie or it'll be the belt for you.
The threat only makes the kids more dangerous, and they send the aforementioned Parts the Clonus Horror, yet another example of someone other than the Mads initiating the experiment. After the first theater segment, we return to the camping planet where the Mads bite the collective bullet and capitulate to every whim of the space children. Bobo plays catch with Scooter, who seems to be only interested in hitting him in the crotch, and Brain Guy petulantly cheats at Candyland against Darlene.
1, 2, 3.
Grandma Pearl, I have to go.
I'm not your grandma. Besides, going is for babies.
Hey, you moved that. I saw Uncle Brain Guy.
Can you back that up, shrimp?
Nanny, boo, boo, you're in a chocolate
Okay,
lake.
I'm in the chocolate lake. My own personal hell.
When Pearl is completely fed up with the all-powerful ankle biters, she asks Mike and the Bots to think of a distraction, so they come up with a sedated kiddie show that resembles Sesame Street without Muppets or sets or anything remotely interesting, aside from Servo's creepy fake laugh which comes back in later episodes. But instead of quitting while they're ahead, they decide to up the ante and perform a show that is best described as disturbing.
Muchachos, véanse para la propia bolsa. ¡Rompelo! Y ahora me gustaría presentarse una letra muy especial. Agua.
I don't know what's more unsettling, Crow's pigtails or Mike's silver booty shorts. The next experiment, 812, the incredibly strange creatures who stopped living and became mixed-up zombies, is mostly made up of host segments unrelated to the series arc, aside from a bookend involving Pearl taking the space children back to their homeworld in the Widowmaker.
Ow!
Scooter.
Well, Nelson, I see you found me. Stop hitting me! I packed up these preternatural little kids we found, and now I'm taking them back home to their omnipotent mommies and daddies.
We got homesick.
I'm hungry again.
Jeez, Louise, didn't I just give you a big jar of garlic salt?
I finished it.
We finished our cocktail onions, too.
Well, buddy, grab Grandma's purse. Let's see what we got in there. I think there's some...
But by the end of the episode, she encounters their parents, who are more than happy to take the little runts back.
And we're lost and hungry.
And why? Because we ran away.
Oh, well, aren't you just the most delightful little thing?
He's funny. Oh, I know. You can be our new mommy.
Hold on. I ain't gonna be nobody's mommy.
Okay, you can be our new grandma.
Don't you ever say that again. Capiche? All right. Here's some clove gum and a church key. Now scram.
Pearl mostly sits out the next experiment, 813, Jack Frost, leaving Bobo and Brain Guy in control, though they spend most of the time bickering about who's in charge and which chores they're responsible for.
Each morning begins with a tick bath for Bobo. Then, while he is still groggy, push worm medicine down his throat.
I have worms.
Then mash 65 bananas by hand, cover with honey, and sprinkle with termites.
I won't eat them any other way.
Then apply a generous portion of ointment to his... Oh, no!
Oh, you have to!
No! Mike, I can tolerate this ape no more. I appeal to you as a somewhat higher being. Well, come down here and... Well, just come down here.
It isn't until the topic of discussion turns to dissatisfaction with the lawgiver that the two finally find some common ground.
Do you find that, that the lawgiver can be mean sometimes?
Well, it's against my culture to gossip.
Oh, sure, but do you?
Yes, she can really be a stone-cold witch sometimes.
Oh, I know, and she can be so condescending.
Oh, precisely. It's like, oh, I'm so great.
Pearl returns from her deep space journey at the episode's end, and when the next experiment, 814, Riding with Death, begins, the Mads campsite has become a battle zone in the middle of a violent robot war, echoes of the Terminator. Pearl asks Mike for some air support, and he passive-aggressively makes a baking soda bomb with predictable results.
Sure, no problem. I used to make these babies in junior high school out of vinegar and baking soda.
Is that too much baking soda, Mike? Or...
And high school, now that I think of it. In college, too. Got expelled for that.
Definitely too much baking soda, Mike.
A little too
and
much.
For that temp job I worked on, too. Until that one guy in receiving got me fired.
Mike, honey, the baking soda just
yeah, just a little prank, but he had to rat out on me, didn't he? Oh, well, I guess some people are just like that.
Bombs away, Mike.
Okay, Mike.
Oh, right. Okay, bombs away. All right, bombs away.
Bombs away.
Hey, I heard you can make a bazooka out of PVC tubing and a used diaper.
No, okay.
Wow. Well, okay.
There you go,
okay.
Mrs. Forrester. A little distraction for
distraction. Okay. A few things, Mike. First, well, you blew up another planet, obviously. Yep. What's that, 3 for you now?
I think so.
Second, are you out of your stupid runnets? Go, you dumb man!
Yes, Mike blows up his third planet.
What'd you do with that planet, you silly, stupid old man? Someone's going to jail, and it's not going to be me.
Don't remember, we got movies.
Oh, we got movie side.
During Experiment 815, Agent for Harm, the bill finally comes due, and Mike is summoned to a neutral black and white dimension to stand trial on 3 charges of planetary annihilation.
Can anyone tell me where I am?
Michael J. Nelson!
Yes?
Michael J. Nelson, you are charged with crimes against man and nature.
So that failure to yield finally went to bench warrant, huh? I knew it.
No, but now that we know about that, we'll add that to the charges.
Oh, I'll just be quiet then, huh?
Good idea.
Mike, who also made his directorial debut on the episode, is given the option of choosing his own defense and prosecution. But because the omnipotent judge doesn't comprehend sarcasm, he ends up with Bobo and Pearl, respectively.
Oh, please, Mr. Nelson, you mustn't kill us. We're an innocent planet. Oh, yeah? Well, tough nipples, planet.
The episode pays tribute to countless films and TV shows like The Flight That Disappeared, Witness, Columbo, and numerous courtroom dramas, most notably Inherit the Wind, and Justice for All, and Anatomy of a Murder.
Brown Betty plays a much bigger role in this whole thing than we realize. Oh, bubbling, full of fruit. Little cinnamon, nutmeg.
Bobo, please, could you get on?
You shut up, boy. I'm defending you here. Now, folks, we're going to hear the word panties used a lot in this trial, so let's get them giggles out right now. Panties, 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 panties.
This pair of panties will be mentioned again in the course of this trial. And when it happens, there will not be one laugh, one snicker, one giggle, or even one smirk in my courtroom. There isn't anything comic about a pair of panties which figure in the violent death of one man and the possible incarceration of another. Proceed, Mr. Beagler.
My favorite moment of the episode comes during a series of video depositions from the bots, particularly Crow's.
Hi, I'm Crow T Robot, and I'm here to tell you that Mike Nelson is innocent. Mike Nelson is 200% not guilty. And if you don't find him innocent, then you can just kiss my fat and that goes for your bullshit court system too. Mike, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there for this bogus trial, man. But let me tell you something, Nelson. If I was there, I'd kick everyone's fat, stupid behinds and then cram it up their Anyway, Mike, buddy, I hope this helps.
Later, Bobo finally proves himself to be a competent lawyer when the subject turns to pie.
Yes. And how did that crust turn out, sir?
Well, it was flaky and delicious. Listen, what are you implying?
I am insinuating, sir, that this man is a fraud and a liar. He has never made a pie crust in his life.
When all is said and done, and after Pearl yells at a little Amish boy for unknown reasons, Mike is found guilty of his crimes, but since he's basically a likable guy, the judge's exact wording, his punishment is merely 800 hours of community service. Experiment 816, Prince of Space, is another high-concept episode. It begins with Bobo having Pearl pull over the Widowmaker so he may relieve himself, only to slip and fall into a calamitous situation.
Well, I'm going to go into this big tunnel thing here, so you can't look at me even
Wait,
if
wait,
you
wait,
try.
don't go in there. Don't go. I wouldn't do that. That's a... No, don't. That's a wormhole.
A worm what?
A wormhole.
A what hole?
A wormhole. Wormhole. A cosmic rift where all time and matter is rearranged seemingly at random.
No big deal.
Well, it is. They're very unpredictable and dangerous.
Well, so am I, Brainiac. Let's get in there and get that monkey.
Brain Guy lassos the SOL to the Widowmaker, and before you know it, we're going wormhole hopping.
Whoa, we're being Bronco busted!
Oh, hang on, little dogies!
Whoa, that's heavy.
We hope you enjoy traveling Wormhole Express Airlines. Your in-flight movie today is a little confection from our friends in Japan called Prince of Space. Sayonara!
Whoa.
The next segment plays with the rules of time, as everyone on the bridge is temporally behind servo by approximately 5 seconds.
Oh, hey, Tom. How'd you get here so fast?
Oh, he'll be along. I have his chicken puppet.
Hey, where's Crow?
Talking like what?
Why are you talking like that?
Well, no, I'm not. I'm just way ahead of you, Mike.
Well, like that. You know, you're answering my questions before I ask them. I don't know. I'm just asking them the same thing.
No, you dope. I mean, I'm moving faster than you, temporally speaking.
Hey, what do you mean you're way ahead of me?
Next up, crossing into an alternate dimension where everything is normal except for one key difference.
What?
Mike, you're a small robot.
Yeah. Well, of course I am. What do you expect?
Well, normally when we're not in a wormhole and stuff, you're a big, chunky human thing.
Yeah, and I don't mean to offend you or anything, but as you are, I have the urge to put you back in your case.
Come on, cut it out. Now, I can't speak for your reality, but in mine, we are all robots serving on this vessel, and I'm in command.
When Mike and the bots next leave the theater, they notice that something is amiss on the satellite.
Well, this is good, huh? Okay, everything seems to be back to normal. I'm a befleshed human being, and you guys are... Oh, no. Oh, no.
Mike, why are we in a Sylvan Glen?
Hey, I got hay fever. Cool.
I'm gonna go lay down till this all blows over. I'll see you later.
I may need a Kleenex.
You're fine.
Poor guy. Yeah. He doesn't handle alternate realities very well, does he?
Sorry.
This is the only outdoor scene in the history of the series and looks lovely to boot. But it didn't last long. By the end of the experiment, we have exited the wormhole and are orbiting past a version of Earth again, but thousands of years in the past.
Mrs. F, how about you? Do you know where we are or when we are?
I don't know, Mike. There's no sign of Bobo, but there are marble columns and intricate frescoes.
Evidently a sewage system of some sort.
Could it possibly be?
Welcome to Roman time.
Guards, seize them.
As I mentioned earlier, after this cliffhanger, Sci-Fi Channel did not air new episodes for an entire month, so when the show returned for Experiment 817, The Horror of Party Beach, Brain Guy must use his mental abilities to literally replay the last 30 seconds of Prince of Space before resuming the story in earnest.
There you have it, and that was just a few seconds ago.
I said seize them.
I bid the guards leave for the day.
What? Why?
I didn't think we'd need them with the festival and all.
Well, then seize them yourself.
Right!
Oh, wait. We're gods.
Yes, gods.
Gods?
Yes, I am a Perlo.
A Perlo,
and
right.
he is Brain Gaius.
Bobo is missing, and the remaining Mads are posing as gods, but the wife of their Roman host, Flavia, played by Bridget, is deeply suspicious of Pearl's divinity.
You know, I think I'm really gonna like it here. Say, be a dear and have one of your fellow servants bring up more lamb.
Sure. You know, I find it so refreshing that a woman your age can still get blemishes.
Your plainness must afford you a peaceful anonymity. You're lucky.
Tell me, is that pile of straw on your head easier to care for than real hair?
You are so brave to wear that, even with all those black goat hairs sticking out of all the moles of your back.
Tell me, is your husband so pale because you suck the lifeblood out of him?
He's not my husband.
In the next experiment, 818, Devil Doll, Pearl and Brain Guy are introduced to the masses during Lesser God Day and win their hearts and minds by introducing society to the glory of pants. But their new status quo is endangered during a gladiatorial match between the mysterious Mad Goth and a phalanx of lions.
Thank you. Ah, you want some lion, huh? Take that. Oh, and how about you, buddy? I'm the thorn in your butt.
my brain. Those glasses.
That smell?
That red butt.
It's
Bobo!
This cliffhanger is followed up in Experiment 819, Invasion of the Neptune Men. Pearl and Brain Guy feel the walls closing in on them, so Brain Guy conjures a noose.
Lovely.
No! Brain Guy, no! No! I'm using this!
No, you're not. Let's wait, Pearl. Tempting as it is, we must delay our own suicides and recapture Professor Bobo. His reckless time travel could rip apart the universe itself.
But instead of killing themselves, they decide to gather Bobo from his life of godhood and depart ancient Rome as soon as possible, though Brain Guy has to first appeal to Pearl's inherent selfishness.
How to explain it to the likes of you? Okay. Bobo ripples time itself. The Nabisco Company never comes into being. No more chicken in a biscuit.
Bobo's messing with my favorite snack cracker.
That's right.
They stand in an autograph line waiting to remind Bobo of his true identity, and true to character, he foils their ruse in the process.
Oh, Lawgiver, hello! Hi, Brain Guy. What brings you here?
They are not gods.
Them gods?
I'm a little bit of a god.
They're no gods, and I sure as hell am no mad god.
Gods? Seize them.
In the last experiment we'll discuss this week, 820 Space Mutiny, our reunited Mads spend the entire episode imprisoned, unable to escape because Brain Guy's reality-altering cerebrum has been confiscated. When a random guard returns it to its rightful owner, Pearl tries to convince Brain Guy to seduce Flavia and secure their freedom, but he's not up to the challenge.
No, I could never seduce a woman, Pearl.
Oh, because you're...
Well, I thought you knew. I am completely and utterly without a body. I have no body.
Well, thank you for coming out with that information.
Instead, he brings Mike down to the dungeon to perform the duties he cannot, and it goes poorly.
What are you doing here?
Well, hey, if it isn't Flavia's daughter.
What does that even mean?
Well, I
Yeah?
guess it just means that.
Yeah. What? Come on, what?
Much like the interactions between Mr. B. Natural and Jack Perkins on Turkey Day, it's always fun to see Mike fail to romance his real-life wife. After the Mads are released, Bobo goes back for a wedge of cheese and knocks over a lantern, which sets Rome ablaze. The last 2 episodes of the season are completely unrelated to the ongoing story arc, which is eventually resolved in the 9th season premiere, The Projected Man, so we'll save the discussion of those experiments until the end of this chapter. Everybody loves a cliffhanger, and that is where we end this chapter of the Coolness Chronicles. Next week is our customary bonus episode, but 2 weeks from today we'll continue our deep dive into MST3K's 8th season with the history of a very special Gill man, the horrors of Mandingo, and the celebration of my favorite director to ever be featured on the show, Jack Arnold. All that and much, much more as we continue to chart the history and legacy of Mystery Science Theater 3000. Thank you to everyone involved in making MST3K for everything they've contributed to my life and culture as a whole. Double thanks for writing the episode guide that I will quote frequently in this season of the pod. I also want to thank Shout Factory for their excellent supplemental material that was invaluable to my research for this and every episode to follow on the subject. If you want to support the artists who made this wonderful show, many episodes are available on VOD at rifftracks.com. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy what you hear, please rate and review the show on iTunes or your chosen source, and share it with anyone you can, any way you can. This has been the largest and most fulfilling endeavor I've ever seen to completion, and it would be nice to keep making the show until it just isn't fun anymore. Have any questions or comments, want to be on the show, or is there anything I missed in this particular chapter? Contact me on Twitter at CoolnessPodRyan or on our Facebook page, and keep on the lookout for updates. And, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, we have a Patreon page. Soon the bonus episodes between Tuesdays will be exclusive there, in addition to a big interactive parallel project that I'm planning for 2020, not to mention the bonus episode involving Planet of the Apes and Alien. If you want to be part of the adventure, just go to patreon.com/coolnesschronicles. It's going to be quite a bit of fun as the new year approaches. Until next time, do what you love, don't be a dick, and as always...
Even though my feet are made out of bologna sandwiches, I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm taking tap dancing lessons, and as soon as school's over, Alice and I are going to go hike the Grand Canyon. Until then, I'm just a regular high school kid with a grotesque deformity.
The Coolness Chronicles is written, produced, and edited by Ryan Rodriguez. Executive producers are Tracy Rodriguez and Luis Rodriguez. Original music by Bildschirm. Please visit bildschirm.bandcamp.com for more information.